Hey guys, it's Malthus here once again, and I wanted to give a full and concise sort of guide to the Frostbolt Elementalist that has seen completion, been really good for mapping, and has done most endgame bosses at this point. Now, if you haven't seen any of the previous videos, I'll go over just a little bit of gameplay for the build real quick in a tier 12 Asuri map, giving off, a good feel of what the character looks like when being played in mapping situations, which is where it definitely shines as a character. So if you've not seen any of the previous videos before, this character is an Elementalist, which is a witch. The main spell is Frostbolt. We use a couple of threshold jewels to get extra projectiles, which I'll go over soon, as well as using GMP to have a very nice spread of projectiles, and it gives great clear speed and great prolif. So the idea behind the build is to then get your cold damage to do ignite damage instead, while still being a fully cold damage scaling skill, and it gives really good clear speed, really pretty skill, and just a nice overall experience as far as an Elementalist character goes to be played. So it does get a bit laggy, when there's really big packs and it's got Beyond and all that. But you can see, build pretty effective. We do kill a lot of things really quickly, and it's been one of probably the funnest character I've played so far this league. Fairly smooth action for clear speed, and fairly decent single target DPS, though as I have mentioned, Fireball will get you going a lot further, I do believe, on the single target race. So now that we've established that the character is pretty goddamn sexy to play in maps and works really well, I will go over the whole character in detail so you can copy it if you want, but I will mention right from the get-go, it basically does nothing better than Fireball. So if you want a character for pure effectiveness as an Elementalist with some nice projectiles, then Fireball is probably your go-to, whereas this is more of a novelty because it's got a really cool MTX and gets a few more projectiles going thanks to the threshold jewels. Otherwise, it doesn't really do anything better than Fireball whatsoever. It just is a different feel and kind of aesthetic. But all the details about this character can be seen on the left-hand side in the text, which I'll probably go over anyway. But to get things started, we built around essentially the threshold jewels. You get 2 of these very early on. All you need is 40 int within the radius of the jewel. You don't even have to allocate it as long as there's 40 int, and each jewel gives you 2 projectiles and then more projectile speed or increased projectile speed as it goes. So we have 2 of these, meaning 4 extra projectiles, though for the most part with the character we are very often using GMP while clearing maps because we still have very nice burn even with the GMP intact, and it gives a lot more projectiles. When you get serious with your single target, you use slower projectiles, and it's a lot slower, a lot harder to clear maps with. When you want to clear maps that are a bit tougher because they have maybe Enfeeble, get rid of GMP and put in Pierce instead, and then you still have a nice projectile speed while doing a lot more burn damage than you would with GMP. So that said, the full gem link setup is Frostbolt, Controlled Destruction, then we're probably going Cold Pen, then Empower, then Crit Strikes, and then the last setup of either one of these 3 gems. And the chest we're using is a Skin of the Loyal. Now, it's not the best chest ever, but it does have +1 socketed gems, which means the Empower gets +1 and the Frostbolt gets +1, giving you in total about 20% more damage. So it's pretty damn worth using, and I had enough energy shield from everything else that I didn't really need a bigger energy shield chest, but you can definitely go a Var Regalia or something else. You just lose a bit of damage unless you get, a level 21 Frostbolt or a level 4 Empower, but these are pretty budget, gems, so I didn't go for anything too serious there. And all in all, a Skin of the Loyal goes for 1 or 2 exalts, so I've always been a fan of this chest ever since it came into existence. So that's the main gem setup and the 2 jewels we're building around. The rest of the passive tree basically just revolves around grabbing some general damage, some flask nodes, a few power charges here or there, but in general we want to scale elemental damage because it will double dip on our burn, and projectile damage, which will also double dip on our burn, and ultimately we are, instead of hitting with pure cold damage, which is what Frostbolt is, we do hit with pure cold damage, but we we then scale Ignite thanks to 3 dragons. And the reason we went with 3 dragons for Ignite instead of Hrimburns or anything else is because we want elemental equilibrium, and the other sort of options, which I've explained in a couple videos in more detail, a couple videos ago in more detail if you want to know. The other options usually screw your elemental equilibrium because they give you damage to other sorts of spells like your Orb of Storms, and it just doesn't work as nicely. So 3 dragons is the best option for the pure burn in this build. Otherwise you can go Hrimburn or Cold to Fire and Avatar of Fire, and you won't be using elemental equilibrium in that scenario. So the passage tree just jumps around. It's pretty straightforward. You start as a witch and, you know, go there and then over here and then start going down there. You get Vilepact, you get Ghost Reaver whenever you have what I ended up getting for Leech, which is Warlord's Blasphemy. So that'll bring me to my mana reservation, currently reserving with Discipline and a Warlord's Blasphemy. So Warlords is where we get most of our Leech from, as well as our mana Leech, and I think that was a pretty good choice. I don't really see a better way of getting some sustain, and it goes really quite a long way when you're trying to face tank things, so I do recommend using that, and it's where you get most of your mana from, but sometimes you're going to need the mana flask just to get ultimate spam, and if you know, for whatever reason are not within range of your Warlord's Blasphemy. So that setup sits with a level 3 Enlighten, though it's not really too important in this build. I just happen to have one, so I used it. Discipline, Warlord's Mark, and Blasphemy. Now, we don't have that much strength, so I leveled as much as I could. It's not too important anyway. Other gem setups for the character are Assassin's Mark, Curse on Hit, Power Charge on Crit, and Orb of Storms. Now, we are using a Dodra's Damning, so we always have Warlord's Mark up, but whenever we want, we put down Orb of Storms, and that's how we get our power charges, because Orb of Storms will get Power Charge on Crit, and it will curse everything with Assassin's Mark, giving you quite a lot of good chance to get a power charge off of those monsters. So the playstyle does end up being a little clunky because we're always just dancing around, pressing our Orb of Storms and then attacking, and I don't always press it, but quite often I will Orb of Storms at least the bosses or harder targets, but you know, you get used to just pressing R before killing a bunch of things anyway. We then have our shield charge setup, which is shield charge, fortify, and faster attacks. Gives us a pretty fast shield charge when comboed with Quicksilver and Silver Flask. Our golem setup sits over here as Ice Golem. That gives us good crit, cold damage. Flame Golem gives us good fire damage and just general damage for ignites, and Vile Lightning Trap, which you use on bosses. And lastly, we have Cast when damage taken, Immortal Coil, increased duration, and Vile Haste as our sort of Cast when damage taken and Vile Haste setup. Now the golems are pretty important because we're an elementalist, so the golems, you have 2 of them, they give you very nice buffs, and they're quite a huge damage buff overall to have in your build. Currently 45k DPS just sitting there, both golems up, goes up to 53, so you can see that's like almost, you know, 20% damage just coming out of nowhere. Golems are amazing. I do love that Ascendancy perk. Otherwise, we do have Shaper of Desolation, which isn't too important, but does give us Shock quite often in the build, and then Prolif, which is pretty effective for killing lots of targets. And then lastly, we have Reflect Reduction, which is pretty damn necessary. If you tried to build this as not an elementalist, you could probably end up one-shotting yourself. We do hit really hard, and even with this, Reflect can sometimes get iffy on harder maps with minus max, for example, which is a very good perk of using GMP because we lessen our initial hit, and it's a lot safer to reflect. As well as that, you know, you might be able to get your Wise Oak balanced all the way across to get a cold reduction too, but I did not manage to do that anyway. But that does bring us to our flasks. We have a Wise Oak, a Diamond Flask, a Silver Flask, a Quicksilver Flask, and a Mana Flask. Now, the Wise Oak is probably the only confusing one, and in this scenario, we have the most cold resist. So the number you're looking at is this one on the right. The one you have the most resist of is what you'll penetrate with your damage. So whenever we press it, we have 220 cold resist, and that means we get 20% cold pen. The lowest one that we have, which is 127 lightning, that's what we'll get for reduced damage taken. That's how the Wise Oak works. As for the rest of the gear, it's pretty straightforward for the most part. Try and get high energy shield on your gloves with some attack speed, because that's important for your shield charge. The boots, Brown Rot Whalers, are pretty goddamn amazing these days, so I'm using them in a lot of my energy shield builds, and I have 80% chance to avoid being stunned if you've killed recently, rolled onto them from Uber Lab. Highly recommend getting that if you're not using any other stun resistance, which I'm not. So if you don't have that, then you probably want to wear an Eye of Chayula or a Valyrium, because stun does become quite a problem. But with this, comboed with the custom damage taken, I have pretty much no problem with stuns, so I'm happy with that. The shield, try and get about 450 plus energy shield. 450s aren't very expensive. 500 plus does start to get a bit more costly. I rolled this myself, but if you're going to use a Skin of the Loyal and a 3 Dragons, that means the rest of your gear has to do some pretty heavy lifting, and mostly your shield. Besides that, yeah, belt, try and get a crystal belt with a big ES roll. Reduced flask charges is a very nice quality of life too, and a couple resists. Crafted that myself as well. Like I said, Dodri's Damning. Your amulet, what you're looking for is primarily high crit multi. Some cast speed goes a bit of a long way for just smoothness. Percent ES, if you don't get that, then craft it yourself, and flat ES as well. Plus we need a few stats, so get those too. And then for our ring, we have an opal ring. Now that elemental damage double dips, so definitely try and get an opal ring. Besides that, it's not really important. I needed strength, so I went for strength, and I was doing strength rolls. And resist, percent ES, craft that on, and some flat energy shield. And lastly, the weapon is Catalyst. Catalyst is a whole bunch of elemental damage, which of course double dips, so highly recommend one of these. It's got good attack speed, bit of cast speed. The leech, absolutely inconsequential, don't even look at it. Overall, a really solid choice for a weapon. Now in the end, the character, I'd say, struggles just a little on crit, because it's only a 5 crit spell, so we do have to use crit strikes, whereas Fireball wouldn't otherwise do that. And besides that, it just gets a bit uncomfortable pressing Orb of Storms all the time until you're truly used to it. But given just how pretty the skill is and how smooth it felt to map with, I recommend it still, even if you haven't played an Elementalist before or something like this. If you have and you just want the strongest possible build, I'd say go Fireball. It definitely has bigger ignites. From what you may have seen from my previous videos, it definitely killed the bigger bosses a lot easier. But that said, this Frostbolt version worked pretty well. That's my version. There might be better ones out there. And if you want to play it, go right ahead. I'm pretty sure that's everything there is to know about this character for the full guide. Thank you very much for watching, guys, and see you next time.